Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie and the host of this podcast. Today, I'm really excited to introduce Roger Nelson. And Roger Nelson, PhD, is the director of the Global Consciousness Project, GCP. And he studied physics and sculpture at the University of Rochester and experimental psychology at New York University and Columbia. And he is the author or co-author of 100 technical papers and 3 books. Connected: The Emergence of Global Consciousness, which is available on Amazon, as well as 2 books written in German with Georg Kindel. He was a professor of psychology at Johnson State College in northern Vermont, and in 1980 joined Princeton's University's PEAR lab to coordinate research. His focus is on mental interactions, anomalous information transfer, and effects on random systems by individuals and groups. He created the Global Consciousness Project in 1997, building a world-spanning random number generator network designed to gather evidence of coalescing global consciousness. He lives in Princeton, New Jersey, and his website is https://global-mind.org. So globalmind.org. So welcome, Roger. I'm so excited to have you as a guest today.
Thank you very much, Lottie. It's very nice to have a chance to talk with you.
So when you go to your website, the first thing that you get hit with is the statement. And it says, coherent consciousness creates order in the world. Subtle interactions link us with each other and the earth. So I can't wait to have you expand on this a little bit. But first, just tell us a bit about what is the Global Consciousness Project?
Okay, there's one way of doing that is to start earlier with technology, but I'll try to just give a general outline of the Global Consciousness Project itself. After lab work showing that people can interact with what we call random number generators and change the way they behave, change the kind of output they have. We developed a smaller and smaller version of these random number generators. This is, by the way, in the 1980s and early 90s. So that's so long ago that we didn't have laptop computers yet, you know. And so we miniaturized as best we could, and more so as time went on because, you know, technology advances. And eventually we had devices small enough, random number generators, small enough we could take them into the field, we could take them to a church, we could take them to the opera, we could take them to a shopping center, or we could take them to the woods and gather data while people were doing rituals about the full moon, that sort of thing. So you may notice that I included shopping centers in a list of places that are otherwise kind of really nice and maybe even conducive to group consciousness forming. If during the arias from famous operas, everybody is focused. Everybody comes together and is basically doing the same thing. They're doing it in such a coherent and resonant way that they become one. The same thing happens in the woods when the ritual is going on. In fact, I think rituals are historically designed really to bring us together, to alleviate the separation that we have during most of our lives. Come together in a ritual and for whatever purpose, maybe to try to get rain to fall, maybe to heal somebody in the tribe, and maybe to praise the source of all of this, you know. But in any case, we do it together. We do, and we become resonant with each other and coherent in those circumstances. Now, after doing these field research experiments, it became clear that we should ask, what if you had 2 or 3 or a dozen of these random number generator devices? What if they were separated from the action? What if there was a major event going on in the world and you had random number generators running? So we did some kind of prototype work. For example, when Princess Diana was killed in the accident in Paris, we didn't have any random number generators running at the time, but we knew that we could gather data during the funeral ceremonies. And it was said at the time in the media that probably something on the order of 2 billion people, I don't know whether that was an exaggeration, but really huge numbers of people would be coming together and sharing a kind of deep emotional bond having to do with this woman who had been a famous, celebrity, princess and so forth. But as she lived longer in the world, she began doing really good stuff. She began applying fame and access that she had to problems like getting rid of landmines that are left over from wars in Africa. Anyway, I asked all my friends to do the kind of work I do with random number generators. Please take data during that day of the funeral ceremonies. Send it to me. I'll put it together. I had 12 data streams from different people, mostly in Europe and the US. And when I put it all together, the combined result, which should be just a random walk, a kind of level random walk, nothing much going on, wasn't at all normal. It took off. And the probability of such a big deviation as we found, combining all these different sources during this 6-hour period of the funeral ceremonies, it was 100 to 1 odds. If you did the same experiment 100 times, you might get that kind of result by chance. So we were kind of off and running, and that led to building a permanent network. It's been running now for more than 23 years. Maybe, permanent might be an exaggeration. At some point, it'll be replaced. Anyway, the Global Consciousness Project, I'm probably going on too long, Lottie, but I'll just say the intent at the time I started building this was to see if we might be able to capture just a little hint of activity of something that we could think of as a global consciousness, where all of us come together. Very large number, millions or billions of people come together because of outside events, or maybe because we want to, because we decided to meditate together or something like that. Right. In any case, I will mention one more.
Yeah.
Then I'll let you say.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So when I was in college, I came across Teilhard de Chardin. He's a famous author of 2 or 3 books that were seminal in the thinking of a lot of people. Teilhard de Chardin was a Jesuit priest. He was also a scientist. So he had this combination of the spiritual and the scientific. He was a paleontologist and spent a lot of time in China, and was one of the people who discovered and interpreted the meaning of Piltdown Man. In any case, this remarkable person wrote about the future of man. He wrote about the phenomenon of man, and he was a poetic writer. It really, really sank into me. He was talking about evolution in poetic terms, and he said, went through the whole background of getting to animals and then getting to the 2-legged animal that is us, and we are conscious at some level that allows us to ask questions and try to define things. And we think of ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution. And PEAR said, well, in some sense, but that's only up to now. There is another stage, he said, where we're not finished. And that stage he called becoming the noosphere. And that's a word that means it's a kind of combination of knowing, knowledge, intelligence, and the sphere that's like the atmosphere or the ionosphere.
Mm-hmm.
The noosphere is a coding of intelligence for the earth, a kind of, and this is where the Global Consciousness Project kind of takes it up. It's a potentially conscious layer of intelligence comprised of all of us coming together and being as if, in some sense, acting like neurons do in a brain. There are something on the order of 7 billion of us. There are more neurons in a brain, but not so many more, maybe 700 or maybe 10 times as many. In any case, what the neurons do without knowing anything about what they're doing is create our intelligence. They create our ability to ask questions, our consciousness, and other things too, like our emotions. There's more going on. The heart's involved also, especially when you talk about something like emotions. But ultimately, it seemed to me that we could ask the question, is there any kind of glimmering of a global consciousness that's made up of all the people on the planet, and maybe the animals, the trees, and so forth? So that's the global consciousness in the beginning nutshell.
I love it. So are we then, so when you do this research, you can see that these major events or spiritual events that people sort of link up in their consciousness, and they affect then your random number generator.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see that the people, when they're tuned into the same thing, like a healing or spiritual event or grieving Princess Diana, there is a change in these numbers that you see. So these random number generators are tapping into the brain waves of people, or how does that work?
I wish I could answer that with great certainty. But I think what's going on is a kind of field-like phenomenon. People may be, generally familiar with fields when you think of radio waves and electromagnetism and light, for that matter, creating fields of energy. What I think is happening, maybe happening, is that we human beings and actually other animals and all living things create fields of something that we call consciousness. It's not easy to define consciousness, but these fields, like I'm a source of a consciousness field. It's not just stuck in my head. My consciousness ranges out into the world to some kind of unlimited degree. It reaches into the future, it reaches into the past. It touches you, and it touches everybody who's listening. But we, in other words, are sources of a kind of field of consciousness, which is kind of like saying a field of information. It's different from electricity or electromagnetism, but it has some characteristics that are shared. It has almost unlimited extent as far as we can tell, and it does have this, what physicists call the non-local quality of being extending into the past and the future, as well as being present in the present. So that consciousness field, I think, is what we're registering. It isn't exactly capturing it. When I was first, working on this, I thought we'll capture a little bit of an indication, but what we do ultimately is just register the changes in data that are correlated with or associated with big events in the world, like terrorist attacks and things like 9/11, for example, was a huge event in our consciousness space and had a huge effect on our network of random number generators. But also, as you suggested, Lotte, when we come together and we decide that we're going to gather millions or as many as we can possibly gather to do a peace march or a meditation on a beautiful light future for the planet, when we do that, we create a kind of organized and coherent consciousness field that extends out from all of us, intermixes with all the rest of us. So we become one with each other in a sense that we hardly know how to even talk about. It's very deep in the unconscious layers of our individual consciousness. I don't know when I'm connected with somebody else in this fashion, but the evidence shows that I am sometimes connected with other people through this kind of unconscious interconnection that happens because consciousness is a field and does intermix with other fields. So the Global Consciousness Project is an attempt to register the shifts and movements and the variations in a huge global consciousness field that we all create when we become a coherent kind of unity because of events in the world or because of decisions that we make to come together.
It's fascinating. I told you a little bit about my near-death experience, and so I often tell people, and I end my book with, we are all connected, we are all one, it is all divine, and so are you. Trying to, because that is what I saw during my near-death experience, and it looks like the grid on your book, that fishnet, that span, and the spirit guides telling me everything is connected on Earth, and everything is connected up to this grid. So your consciousness studies are sort of guiding us in that direction, that we truly are connected, and you can see in your research that we are syncing up and start resonating with other people. So when I work as a healer, so I work as a physician half the week, and I work spiritually with people half the week, and I do a lot of medical intuitive readings, and I do ancestral healing. And I've studied ancestral healing, and I just released this whole thing with Hemi-Sync, if you're familiar with Hemi-Sync, about the first CD is Healing the Ancestral Mother Wound. And I always talk about how if I can heal one person, that person is going to change the way their field is, which is the consciousness field, right? And so if I can heal one person, they're going to start healing people around them. So they can heal their family members, they will heal their ancestors, because once that person changes, their consciousness field then changes, and then they resonate and entrain and synchronize with other people around them. And so the more people we heal, can we then change this mess that we're in the world today? If we had enough people meditating on peace and cooperation, and let's feed everybody in the world, and create a better world that it's not based on war and greed, but on helping humanity as a whole, and creating a good environment that we can all survive on this earth, and we stop killing the earth. So if we had enough people meditating on this, would that make a difference, you think?
Yes. What you're saying is just beautiful. I think we're on the verge of being able to capitalize on this potential connection that we all share. And one of the last page of my book, which actually is one I haven't written yet. I'm not sure I was smart enough to put that in the connected book that I published a couple of years ago. But I think, the direction we're headed requires that we have a great deal of confidence that we can heal each other and heal ourselves. And I love what you're saying about the kind of, shall we say, viral spread of healing.
Right?
For once, a viral spread that's really the right thing. So this kind of, the ability that you have as a healer to transfer the kind of structured understanding of how, wholeness is, constructed. When you transfer that to somebody else, then that person now is another source of the same thing. It's absolutely wonderful. And I think that that's our next job. What do they say in Mission Impossible? Your mission, if you will accept it, is to be one with each other.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, because we do sync up and we do become one. And it's interesting that these research that you've been doing shows that we synchronize with each other. And so would you say we sort of become one mind when we go into that space and we all grieve Princess Diana, or we all grieve the 9/11 attack, or whatever, big events that have happened? Do we all then synchronize and train with each other's consciousness and sort of become one mind?
I think so, although it's not something that we can directly perceive. It's something that happens at a level that we don't normally have access to, and for which, thankfully, we can build instruments to detect this connection. So that's what this Global Consciousness Project network of random number generators is for, is to give us scientific indications and information about something that we otherwise, something about ourselves that's very important, but which we aren't able to perceive directly. And so I think I forgot what I was going toward. The message, the ending message in my next book is that what we have to do, this mission that we need to accept, is to raise all that unconscious connection, to raise it up into awareness. So in other words, to allow this interconnection that we can see exists because of the instrumentation. And sometimes, I mean, I think it's pretty clear, we feel it. Like if you've been in a really good meeting or you went to a great concert, you know after the fact that you were just transfixed. You were a seriously, completely engaged part of a larger matrix of intelligence and consciousness and so on, whether it's enjoyable or it might be a fearful situation. In the case of 9/11, as you said, we were bound together by an incredible surge of emotions. First, things like fear and maybe a second anger, but very soon compassion in a major way. Compassion from people all around the world, all sharing this one remarkable emotion. Anyway, I think we're on the way to learning how to bring the unconscious up into consciousness so that we can actually consciously evolve and
like
consciously move toward the manifestation of the amazing potential that we have as human beings. We're magical creatures at our best, and that best can, lots of people individually show up with that best manifest. People who we revere, Nelson Mandela, or Martin Luther King was another one. Jesus was one, Muhammad also, and the Buddha.
Yeah.
The only person I ever thought of as a kind of guru, because I'm not a very good joiner, was Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk and an absolutely amazing presence, something like love personified, just nothing much else necessary, because it was just such a richness of person. So we all have that as potential, and we can help each other become healers, and as you're talking about doing, by kind of an automatic process. You give structure and meaning to one person, and that person cannot help but give it to another. It's, I think, probably necessary for us to work hard, as many as we can get to thinking about this, to work hard to become one, to work hard to love each other and feel compassion for each other. And we have to do that because at the present time, there's a kind of countervailing force that's destructive, really.
Mm-hmm.
It's separation, it's division, it's like teaching the wrong things about humanity. We need to teach the right things, that we really are magical creatures, as I think I said before, and our potential is just amazing.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I always tell people you're way more, spiritual and magical than you think you are. And because I'm also a medium, so I communicate with the spirit world, something that came about after having 2 near-death out-of-body experiences. And I had a lot of electrical interference, and all my watches would stop, and I would start seeing things before they happened. And all these things that I didn't at all believe in until I had to experience for myself, because I was a complete materialist. Science not, and if you could not prove it to me, as far as I was concerned, it didn't exist, or it was being impossible. It would be impossible to have it happen. And look at me now, right? 64 years later, and who I became as a result of having these experiences. But that whole thing you were talking about, the subconscious, there is a link there too. And we have the greed in the world, and we have it's like the yin and yang of the world itself. Mm-hmm. So whenever we have good things, we have bad things. It's just the way I look at it, the world we live in. We have to have an opposite of everything in order to understand what is good. Well, that's bad, right? So that we kind of learn how to separate that. But the subconscious, there is also that subconscious link. So if we all go into this, we grieve for Princess Diana, we have this moment of compassion for the 9/11 event, etc. What then happens to the subconscious mind? Because the subconscious is also linked then. Because if the conscious mind is linked, then you're aware of what you're doing. The mm-hmm. subconscious mind would then also be linked.
That's an interesting question. I haven't thought about things quite that way. I guess I imagine something like a conscious experience mm-hmm. that generates powerful emotion will be going all the way down. It won't be just in my prefrontal cortex. It will be also in my limbic system. Mm-hmm. It will be, I mean, we even notice things like catching our breath, or shocking I have to remember to breathe again. That's really low level kind of stuff, but emotions do that. And by the way, it isn't just the brain, the cortex, and the limbic system, and the medulla oblongata, or all of that stuff. It's also the whole body, and especially the heart. The heart has its own intelligence, and it has its own brain, really. And in some ways, it's more, I guess it isn't quite right to say more powerful, but it is more steadfast. It is more realistically oriented, because it's got to beat. It's got to be connecting with the breathing system, and the blood has to flow. But what I mean to say is that we are complex being, made of mind and matter, made of brain and heart, and our best bet. And I think people like you are teachers of this idea. What we want to do is integrate ourselves. We want to become one within ourselves, and not be torn by a desire for this and a desire for that when they're contrary to each other. We have to learn how to, bring ourselves into kind of balanced oneness. And for that, I would be surprised if you would disagree. One of the best tools is meditation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I have a dear friend, Stefan Schwartz, who I've heard any number of times say the best gift you can give yourself, and ultimately it also turns out give to the world, is learn to meditate. Give yourself some time every day to try to bring yourself all together, to connect within yourself, and ultimately that will allow you to connect with the whole world in the most healthful and meaningful way. And he also proselytizes the idea of changing the criteria for valuing things in a powerful way. Most of us think if it's worth more money, it's worth more. But that isn't the right way to value things ultimately. What Stefan says, and what I strongly believe, is that what promotes well-being in the world is more valuable. And there is nothing that could do our culture, our US culture, but also the world in general, more good than to shift toward thinking about well-being of all of us living together as a way of judging whether we're on the right track. Are we doing the right kind of life?
Mhm.
And the answer is it promoting well-being? If it is, you're on the right track.
That's good. So when we talk about the consciousness and the global consciousness, where does consciousness reside? Because when I had my near-death experiences and I left my body and I'm on the other side, the first thing that I learned was I'm still me. I'm still me, just outside my body. So consciousness cannot possibly reside in my brain, because my brain is down there in my body, but I'm outside my body and I'm having a very conscious experience. And that's, I think, in general, many near-death experiences have this thought. So where would you say, where do you think consciousness actually reside? Is that in the field itself, or is it just, is the brain some kind of radio antenna that communicates with the consciousness that really exists in a field outside our body, and we just kind of download information from that consciousness field? What are your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts about that, but they're not necessarily well organized. I'm not a philosopher in the sense necessary to really dig into that kind of question. But I believe that, exactly as you say, that consciousness is something that exists in the great world. It's really non-local. Consciousness is something that happens at many levels. I think starting with the universal level. I'm among the people who believe that the universe is conscious, and that the sun and the earth and the planets are partaking of this vast and universal consciousness. They're, in a sense, all of these, the cosmic bodies and the cosmic activities, they're all part of a universal consciousness that is behind everything, or below or above. Surround. We're in the midst of something that we may never be big enough to comprehend. But I think when we're at our best, we recognize that we are part of a larger universe, or larger entity. So that our consciousness is a kind of aspect of the world in which we live. So, and in terms of a personal kind of consciousness, yes, the brain is part of it. But it's only part of it. And other aspects of consciousness, as we actually experience it, things like, the meaning of red or the meaning of love. Those kinds of things aren't made out of meat, or neurons necessarily. Those kinds of things are huge, almost impossible to conceive unless we think big, unless we understand that our consciousness is present in all of the world.
So would you say, so is it, you also talked about the heart, and the heart has its own brain, right? Well, we already know this from science. So do you think it's when we connect with each other and affect your random number generator,
Mm-hmm.
is it the brain? What do you think? Is it the brain that's connecting, syncing up, or is it the heart that's syncing up with the other people, or is it both, or is it more than that?
Yeah, as for syncing up with other people, I think it's definitely both. Because the reason I say that is from evidence, it's pretty good evidence. We have done 500 formal trials of looking at one event and then another event, 2 or 3 different major events each month, things that really gathered huge numbers of people in what we think of as a kind of coherent consciousness. And because we were curious and also realized that we want to ask questions later of this database, we looked at a variety of different kinds of events, big ones, small ones, emotionally powerful ones, and others that didn't really have much emotion. And all that allowed us later to ask questions like, what's the most effective state of being or state of mind in terms of creating a strong effect in our data? And the most powerful, it turns out to be an emotion, most of us think anyway, is compassion. If the event that we're looking at is rated to have a high level of compassion, it will have a bigger effect than something with less compassion evident, or no compassion at all, just kind of a bland event. And it will also outmaster or overwhelm in terms of the effect size that's created, even powerful emotions like fear. It's to me, that difference is not literally significant, but emotions like compassion are better than fear at producing the kind of connections that make the data in our network. I should probably take just a moment to say, answer part of your question I haven't so far, which is what's pushing the network? What's pushing our random number generators? What's the source of that effect? And what I believe it to be is the kind of structure that exists in the consciousness field that each of us has. And if we're in a coherent group responding to a major event in the world, if there's maybe millions of it, we're joined together and kind of synchronized in our emotional response. What that translates to, if you think in terms of emotion, in terms of the information and the consciousness, the shape and nature of the consciousness, it structures our consciousness. That means that we have a very sharply defined, kind of powerful, defined presence that we manifest in the world. I should back up and try saying that in a simpler way. If you think about something like distant healing, if you are asked to heal somebody who's in another state, hundreds of miles away, you can do that, it turns out, because there is something about the way a healer is, which is highly structured. You're all together, together and organized and structured. You know what the way things should be. And the person who needs healing, on the other hand, is a little bit like a random number generator. It's not really the same thing, but there's a disorder in that system. And so that constitutes a kind of need for structure, which the healee, the person who's wounded or sick, can't provide for themselves. They have been attacked by whatever whatever causes the problem.
Mhm.
And so they need some help. And David Bohm, a physicist who died about 10 or 15 years ago, was a remarkable man. He said that if we think about information
Mhm.
as active information, it's possible to transfer to create in a case where there's a need for it,
Mhm.
the structured information that will fill that need. So I think what happens in healing is that the healer has highly structured consciousness information, which we have said
Mhm.
extends out into the world.
Mhm.
And it can then manifest because of the intention of the healer. It can manifest in that person who needs the healing as a
Mhm.
kind of structuring force within that person. And this is exactly what happens to the random number generators too.
Yeah.
I think that we become highly structured when we're coherent in a group. And so we are sending out a structured field into the world. And we have these devices that are, in a sense, they're waiting for something to change them from being completely disorganized, unpredictable, so that they can absorb a little information from us and become slightly more structured. And they become so in a way that is, in our network, we have something like 60 or 70 of these devices around the world. They're supposed to be independent. They're far from each other, thousands of kilometers separated. And somehow they become correlated. So that instead of having a random kind of activity, they have a synchronized activity to some very small degree, but a degree that's real, and so we can detect it.
It is so fascinating because the implications of this, once humanity understands and realizes that, it's like a quantum leap of intelligence and changing the world and the way we operate in the world today. Once we can tap into this source, it's like a high level computer that's not even been designed yet, but we're all going to be tapping into that as beings, as human beings,
I
right?
pray for that.
Right. Right. Create
Yeah.
some healing for the world. But when it reminds me of the book The Secret Teachings of Plants, The Intelligence of the Heart in the Direct Perception of Nature by Stephen Herod Booner, and how he, with all his research, found that we synchronize and train with plants, and with other things, whether it has a heart or not, right? So a plant doesn't have a heart, but we still affect the plant. So we talk about people with a green thumb, but right, so these people, they talk to their plant, they nurture the plant, they send out a different consciousness field that then the plant then resonates with that human. And then, like plants themselves, they have this, trees talk to each other. And I don't know if you've seen the movie, the Fantastic Fungi by, I think it's Paul Stamets, the mushroom guy.
Oh, right.
The mycelium, and it's like a whole network of intelligence, right? And and so we are all linked together, the plants, the earth. And you talk about on your website where it said subtle interactions link us with each other and the earth.
Yes. Well, we are actually, I'm old and I'm retiring, and so I'm not running the Global Consciousness Project more as a formal experiment. However, for the last year or more than a year, I've been working with a group of people at Heart Math Institute. You may know that.
Yeah.
and Global Coherence Initiative, also IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and some people from elsewhere as well. We're making GCP 2.0 as a next generation of this project. The same group that at Global Coherence Initiative is also instrumenting trees and putting instruments on trees in a network to look at the networking of the trees and send information to the computers, and so we can link it up with the GCP 2.0 and link it up also with other kinds of things like social measures. What are people thinking about, or what's the major Twitter trend? Maybe, we'll be looking at all kinds of what's the sun doing. What is the cosmic variation around the Earth like? So we're going to be taking advantage of what people sometimes refer to as big data. All kinds of things coming together. But the really, really beautiful thing is that we're going to be able to tap into the network of trees, and in that sense, all kind of by extrapolation into the world of the fungi, which talk to each other, where the trees actually communicate in such a way as to help and serve each other. I love the future.
What do you think our computers will be like, let's say 30 to 50 years from now?
What do I think computers will be like?
Yeah.
They'll be more subtle. If we get our act together well enough to survive for the next 30 or 40 years, I know people who think it's not very likely. I think artificial intelligence will develop so much that it will be possible to kind of have a communion with a computer or with an artificial intelligence. I'm not one of those who worries that we'll be overwhelmed and taken over, because why bother? The AI, if an AI becomes so intelligent, it might want to, might be able to take us over. I think it will have better things to do. But so what I expect is just a further development in somewhat the same direction, but also with surprises. And I think that among the surprises will be how closely connected the kind of silicon world and the organic world might become. I know there are people who already are kind of hoping that we might get a brain implant so we can upload our consciousness and presumably download it into a new body or something. I think that all that's a little, egoistic and crazy. But we'll if we survive, if we can, calm down and pay attention to the needs of all the people in the world and the plants, and we're hurting ourselves and the world very badly at the present time by exploiting, instead of by the Christian view was sort of overinterpreted, probably misinterpreted in the first place. We were supposed to have dominion over the earth, dominion over the fowl and the animals and all of that. And we mistook what that meant. What it should be is husbandry. It should be stewardship instead of this exploitative dominion, like with the iron fist. We're in danger of drowning all the coastlines, and we're in danger of it's beyond danger. We have already caused the extinction of millions of species. And we are not able to bring ourselves under control. I hope that is the main thing that we have to do is in the near future, is bring ourselves under control. Maybe the advanced computers, AI style, can help us with that.
What do you think the meaning of life is?
The meaning of life. The first thing that pops to my mind is love. You know, the meaning of life is something like love, because it is what life does. If life is, if life is to succeed, to prosper, it has to be made out of love.
I love it. And before we close up this interview today, if you could share a message to the listeners of wisdom of how they can, tune in and make the world a better place, what would that advice be? Okay,
there's a couple of stages. One of them is heal thyself. And that the best tool, which I talked about already for that, is meditation. And it doesn't need to be some kind of formalistic meditation. It mainly needs to be with yourself for 20 minutes each day. Just try to relax and breathe and pay attention to the breathing, and don't pay attention to all the things that flit by, whether from inside your mind or the neighbors making lawnmower noises. Just relax and let it be, and try and meditate. You can find all kinds of ways to learn to meditate. Okay, so that's step one. And step two is to think about this connection that we have established scientifically, that exists between me and you and all of us. There is a kind of, we have evidence that there is a kind of unconscious level of connection among us all. And it becomes very strong and kind of coherent and powerful when we're all emotionally synchronized, when we connect to each other for either shared despair or shared love and beauty. We create something new, which is of which we're not aware, but which is very powerful. It's an unconscious level of connection. And what I would hope that meditating every day and organizing yourself would do is allow you to think about and actually work toward bringing this unconscious connection up into consciousness. We need to connect. We need to be aware. We need to consciously evolve. We can do that if we bring our unconscious connected state into awareness. And with that, I have to say, I love you, folks. And Lottie, thank you so much for asking me such nice questions and being tolerant of my long-winded answers.
So I just loved having you as a guest today. And go check out his book. It's called Connected, The Emergence of Global Consciousness. And to learn more about the Global Consciousness Project, go to https://globalmind.org. And that link will also be in the podcast notes. So you can just go to the notes and click on it, and it will take you to his website. So again, I just want to thank you, Roger, for being a guest today. It was my pleasure to have you share all your knowledge about the Consciousness Project.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.